The October sun barely peeked over the horizon as Elena Martinez's alarm blared to life. She groaned, fumbling for her phone on the nightstand. 6:15 a.m. Another day in Lakeside was beginning, and she was already behind schedule. Elena glanced at the empty space beside her in the king-size bed. Daniel's side was cold and untouched, the sheets still crisply folded. He must have slept in the guest room again, probably working late on another case. She pushed aside the familiar pang of loneliness and forced herself out of bed. The hardwood floors creaked under her feet as she made her way to the bathroom. The house, a charming Victorian they'd purchased 5 years ago, with dreams of filling it with children and laughter, now felt cavernous and empty. Elena stared at her reflection in the mirror, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the tight set of her jaw. At 35, she looked older than she should, the stress of the past few months etching fine lines around her eyes and mouth. As she showered and dressed for work, Elena ran through her mental checklist for the day. A 9 a.m. meeting with the board at Morton Financial, where she'd been a senior analyst for the past 7 years. Lunch with her best friend Sarah, who'd been pestering her to spill the tea about her marriage troubles. And somewhere in between, she needed to find time to look over the household bills that had been piling up on the kitchen counter. The smell of coffee lured her downstairs. To her surprise, Daniel was in the kitchen, fully dressed in one of his expensive suits, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed. He looked up from his phone as she entered, offering a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I made coffee." Elena nodded, reaching for a mug. "Thanks. I didn't hear you come in last night." Daniel's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Late case. Didn't want to wake you." The silence stretched between them, filled with unasked questions and unspoken worries. Elena sipped her coffee, noting absently that Daniel had remembered how she liked it. A splash of cream, no sugar. It was a small thing, but it made her heart ache for the easy intimacy they'd once shared. "I have a late meeting tonight," Daniel said, not meeting her eyes. "Don't wait up." Before Elena could respond, he was gone, the front door closing with a soft click. She listened to his car start and pull away, wondering when exactly their life together had become a series of polite exchanges and carefully maintained distances. The drive to work was a crawl through Lakeside's morning traffic. Elena's silver Audi inched along Main Street, past the quaint storefronts and cafes that gave the town its charm. She could have walked the 3 blocks to her office faster, but the crisp autumn air had convinced her to drive. As she waited at a red light, her phone buzzed. Daniel's face appeared on the car's display screen. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey," she said, noting the tension in his voice before he even spoke. "I forgot the Henderson files at home," Daniel said without preamble. "Could you bring them to my office?" Elena sighed, glancing at the clock. 8:45 a.m. "I'm already halfway to work, and I have a 9 a.m. meeting." "Right, sorry, I'll figure something out." He hung up before she could respond. The abruptness stung. 8 years of marriage, and lately, their conversations had become increasingly transactional. When had they stopped saying goodbye? Or good morning, for that matter? By the time Elena reached her desk at Morton Financial, her mind was churning with numbers that had nothing to do with her work as a senior analyst. 3 months of Daniel's strange behavior. 2 missed anniversary dinners. Countless hushed phone calls that ended when she entered the room. Earth to Elena. She looked up to see Sarah standing at her cubicle entrance, designer coffee cup in hand and concern etched on her face. Sarah had been Elena's best friend since college, and lately she'd become a lifeline in the increasingly turbulent waters of Elena's life. "You're doing that thing again," Sarah said, perching on the edge of Elena's desk. "What thing?" "That thing where you look like you're calculating the meaning of life while simultaneously planning a hostile takeover." Sarah's tone was light, but her eyes were serious. "Trouble in paradise?" Elena started to shake her head, then stopped. What was the point of pretending anymore? "Have you ever felt like you're living with a stranger?" Sarah's expression softened. "Oh, honey. Want to grab lunch today? That new Thai place opened on 5th. We can talk properly there." Elena nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Sarah. I could use a friendly ear." As Sarah walked away, Elena turned to her computer, forcing herself to focus on the spreadsheets and projections that awaited her. But in the back of her mind, A nagging voice whispered that something in her carefully constructed life was about to change irrevocably. The Thai restaurant was a welcome escape from the sterile office environment. Elena and Sarah sat in a corner booth, the rich aromas of lemongrass and ginger surrounding them. Elena pushed her pad thai around her plate, recounting the morning's interaction with Daniel. "It's not just today," she said, setting down her fork with a sigh. "Last week I found receipts from Castellanos in his jacket pocket." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The fancy Italian place across town? That's an hour drive from his office." "Exactly. When I asked about it, he said it was a client meeting. But why drive across town when there are dozens of restaurants downtown?" "Have you checked your accounts?" Sarah asked, her voice low and serious. Elena set down her fork, her appetite vanishing. "That's the thing. He opened a separate account 3 months ago, said it was for a special real estate investment fund through his firm. And," Sarah prompted, "the paperwork looked legitimate, but—" Elena hesitated, feeling disloyal even as the words left her mouth. "The withdrawals are weird. Every Tuesday afternoon like clockwork. Always cash." Sarah leaned forward, her lunch forgotten. "Elena, you're a financial analyst. What would you tell a client who came to you with this story?" The truth hit Elena like a physical blow. She would tell them to investigate, to protect themselves. But this was Daniel, her husband, her partner, the man who'd spent 2 months learning to cook Italian food just to recreate their first date for their 5th anniversary. "I don't want to believe it," Elena whispered, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "But I can't ignore the signs anymore." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing Elena's hand. "Whatever's going on, you don't have to face it alone. I'm here for you, okay?" Elena nodded, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. As they finished their lunch, she made a mental note to do some digging of her own. If Daniel was hiding something, she needed to know what she was up against. That evening, Elena sat in their home office, staring at their joint account statements. The numbers blurred as she thought about the changes in Daniel over the past few months. The new password on his laptop, the way he'd angled his phone away from her lately, the mysterious weekend errands that never produced any visible results. The front door opened downstairs. Daniel's footsteps echoed on the hardwood, his keys landing in the ceramic bowl by the door. Familiar sounds that suddenly felt like evidence to be cataloged. "Elena?" His voice carried upstairs. She quickly closed the browser. "In the office." Daniel appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. The gesture was so normal, so quintessentially Daniel, that for a moment Elena doubted her suspicions. Then she noticed the small tear in his suit jacket sleeve, a jacket he'd supposedly been wearing all day at the office. "Rough day?" she asked, nodding toward the tear. His hand flew to the sleeve, eyes widening slightly. "Oh, must have caught it on something." He turned away too quickly. "I'm going to grab a shower." As Daniel disappeared down the hallway, Elena leaned back in her chair, mind racing. The tear in the jacket, the late nights, the secret account, individually, each could be explained away. But together, they painted a picture that Elena was finding harder and harder to ignore. She pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment before typing out a text to Sarah. "I think I need to do some digging. Can you meet tomorrow after work?" Sarah's reply came almost instantly. "Absolutely. Your place or mine?" Elena glanced toward the bathroom where she could hear the shower running. "Yours," she typed back. "I'll bring wine." As she set down her phone, Elena felt a mix of determination and dread settle in her stomach. Whatever Daniel was hiding, she was going to find out. The question was, could her marriage survive the truth? The plan formed gradually over the next week. Elena noticed Daniel's Tuesday pattern. He always left the office early, between 2 and 3 p.m., returning hours later with vague explanations about client meetings or property viewings. "I need to know," she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror on Tuesday morning. The woman staring back had dark circles under her eyes from nights spent analyzing bank statements and property records. She barely recognized herself anymore. With shaking hands, Elena called in sick to work, something she hadn't done in 3 years. The guilt of lying warred with her need for answers as she watched Daniel's car pull out of their driveway at 7:45 a.m. At 1:30 p.m., Elena parked her car a block from Daniel's office building. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her supplies: fully charged phone, water bottle, protein bars, and a small pillow. The back seat of Daniel's new SUV could fold down, creating a hidden space behind the tinted windows. She'd discovered this by accident last week while helping him load groceries. At 2:15 p.m., Daniel emerged from his building. Elena's heart raced as she watched him walk to his car, his gait confident and purposeful. She counted to 30 after he drove away, then followed at a safe distance. The drive took them away from the familiar streets of downtown Lakeside, past the mall where they used to spend lazy Sunday afternoons, beyond the city limits where new housing developments gave way to older industrial parks. Daniel's SUV finally turned into a complex of warehouses, some still active, others abandoned to rust and graffiti. Elena parked behind a defunct manufacturing plant, her hands clammy on the steering wheel. This wasn't a place for client meetings or property viewings. Whatever Daniel was involved in, it wasn't his usual legal work. She had two choices: go home and confront him with her suspicions, or find out exactly what her husband was hiding. Elena thought of the tear in his jacket sleeve, the cash withdrawals, the hushed phone calls. She remembered the way he used to look at her, with love and admiration, and how that gaze had turned distant and guarded in recent months. "Sometimes you have to cross a line to find the truth," she whispered, echoing words her mother had spoken years ago about a very different situation. Decision made, Elena grabbed her bag and moved quickly toward Daniel's SUV. The parking lot was empty except for his car and a black sedan with tinted windows. She tried the SUV's back door, unlocked. In seconds, she was hidden in the cargo space, heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it. Through the tinted windows, she watched two men in expensive suits exit the black sedan. They walked toward the warehouse entrance, their posture suggesting they owned not just the building, but the very air around it. Elena checked her phone. 2:45 p.m. Whatever was about to happen, she was committed now. As she settled in for what could be a long wait, she thought about how she'd ended up here, crouched in the back of her husband's car, spying on him like a character in one of the trashy novels her mother used to read. But this wasn't fiction. This was her life, and the answers she found today could change everything. Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was to come. For better or worse, she was about to uncover the truth about the man she had promised to love for better or worse. The warehouse air was thick with dust and the acrid scent of old motor oil. Elena's muscles cramped as she remained still in the SUV's cargo space, her breath shallow to avoid detection. Through a gap in the folded seats, she could see slivers of Daniel's profile, tension evident in the set of his jaw. Voices drifted from outside the vehicle. "Mr. Martinez," a man called, his tone carrying an edge that made Elena's skin prickle. "Mr. Lang is waiting." Daniel's reply was too soft to hear, but his body language spoke volumes. His normally confident posture had morphed into something more submissive, almost fearful. The car door opened and closed, leaving Elena alone with her racing thoughts. Minutes stretched like hours. Elena strained to hear anything beyond the occasional distant clang of metal or muffled voices. Just as she considered risking a peek outside, shouting erupted from the warehouse. "The deadline isn't negotiable!" The sharp tone made Elena flinch. "Either you handle the Reynolds property by Friday, or there will be consequences." Reynolds. The name hit Elena like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Reynolds was their elderly neighbor, a widow who'd recently mentioned feeling pressured to sell her home of 4 decades. The car door opened abruptly. Daniel practically fell into the driver's seat, his breathing ragged. He fumbled with his phone, dialing with shaky fingers. "Sophia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need those transfer documents immediately." "Yes, I know Mrs. Reynolds is hesitant, but we don't have a choice anymore." As Daniel started the car, Elena's mind whirled. This wasn't about an affair or embezzlement. Whatever Daniel was involved in, it was bigger and far more sinister than she'd imagined. The drive home was tense, with Daniel muttering to himself and making several more hushed phone calls. Elena remained perfectly still, her mind racing to piece together the fragments of information she'd gathered. Once home, she waited until she heard Daniel enter the house before carefully extracting herself from the SUV. She snuck in through the back door, heart pounding, and made her way to their bedroom. She had just settled onto the bed, feigning illness, when Daniel knocked softly. "Elena, are you feeling any better?" She coughed weakly. "A little. I think I just need to rest." Daniel hesitated at the door. "I have to go out again. Will you be okay? I'll be fine, Elena assured him, fighting to keep her voice steady. As soon as she heard the front door close, she sprang into action. Elena dove into research mode, her financial analyst skills now turned toward unraveling her husband's secrets. She started with public records, combing through property transactions across Lakeside. A disturbing pattern emerged. Victor Lang's name appeared repeatedly, particularly in cases involving elderly homeowners. Properties were being purchased well below market value, often from seniors who'd lived in their homes for decades. Elena's hands shook as she scrolled through document after document. The scope of the scheme was staggering. It wasn't just Mrs. Reynolds. Dozens of seniors across Lakeside were being targeted. A social media post from Mrs. Reynolds 2 weeks earlier caught Elena's eye. Feeling blessed to have such caring neighbors, Elena and Tom from next door helped me with groceries again. Don't know what I'd do without them. Not ready to leave my home of 40 years, despite what these aggressive real estate people say. Guilt washed over Elena. She'd been so wrapped up in her own problems, she'd missed the signs of her neighbor's distress. Her phone buzzed, startling her. A text from Mrs. Reynolds. "Dear, could you come over? These people from the real estate office are here again, and I'm feeling overwhelmed." Heart pounding, Elena grabbed her keys and rushed next door. She found Mrs. Reynolds in her living room, looking small and frail in her favorite armchair. Across from her sat a sleek, professional-looking woman Elena recognized from Daniel's office Christmas party, Sophia Lang, Victor's daughter. "Elena." Mrs. Reynolds brightened visibly. "What perfect timing. These people say I need to sign today, but I can't make sense of all these papers." Sophia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, this is a private business matter." Elena straightened, channeling every ounce of confidence from her professional life. "Actually, as Mrs. Reynolds has designated me her power of attorney, I think I should review these documents first." The lie came easily, fueled by a protective instinct Elena hadn't known she possessed. Sophia's expression flickered, surprise, then poorly concealed anger, before she gathered her papers. "We'll be in touch, Mrs. Reynolds," Sophia said coolly, brushing past Elena on her way out. As soon as the door closed, Mrs. Reynolds broke down. "They keep coming back," she sobbed, "saying if I don't sell now, I'll lose everything, that the neighborhood is being rezoned, that I won't be able to afford the new taxes." Elena hugged the older woman, her mind racing. She needed help to unravel this web of deceit, and she knew just where to start. The Lakeside Senior Center was quiet the next morning, most of its usual patrons still at home. Elena found Marcus Thompson in his small office, surrounded by stacks of papers and an ancient desktop computer. At 45, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, Marcus didn't look like the firebrand community organizer Elena had read about online. His reputation for advocating for seniors' rights preceded him. "Ms. Martinez," he greeted her, gesturing to a chair. "How can I help you?" Elena took a deep breath. "I think I've uncovered a scheme targeting elderly homeowners in Lakeside, and my husband might be involved." Marcus's expression shifted from polite interest to intense focus. He pulled out a file from his desk drawer. "You're not the first to come to me with suspicions. Look at this." He spread out documents across his desk: property records, bank statements, and handwritten notes from seniors across Lakeside. A pattern emerged of pressure tactics, misleading information, and prices well below market value. "Victor Lang's company has been on my radar for months," Marcus explained. "They target vulnerable seniors, create false financial emergencies, then swoop in with rescue offers that are actually daylight robbery." Elena leaned forward, her voice low. "My husband's their lawyer. I think he's being coerced somehow." Marcus's expression softened with understanding. "That must have been a difficult discovery, but your insight could be crucial. We need someone with inside knowledge to connect the dots." "These people are dangerous," Elena said, thinking of the menacing tone she'd heard at the warehouse. Marcus nodded grimly. 3 months ago, one of my clients, Mr. Chen, tried to back out of a deal. The next day, his grandson's car was vandalized. The message was clear. They spent the next hour developing a plan. Marcus had evidence of systematic exploitation, but needed stronger links to prove intentional fraud. Elena could potentially provide that missing piece. "We'll need to be careful," Marcus warned. "Start by documenting everything. Record conversations if you can, but be aware of consent laws. I have contacts in the DA's office, but we need rock-solid proof. Elena nodded, feeling both terrified and oddly relieved to have an ally. I can access Daniel's home office when he's out. He keeps physical files. Be extremely careful, Marcus emphasized. These people won't hesitate to. A knock at the door made them both jump. It was just a volunteer with coffee, but the moment highlighted the high stakes of their endeavor. As Elena prepared to leave, Marcus caught her arm gently. Remember, you're not alone in this. We're going to help a lot of people. Walking to her car, Elena felt the weight of her new purpose. This wasn't just about Daniel's betrayal anymore. It was about protecting vulnerable people from predators hiding behind legal paperwork and expensive suits. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Daniel. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to return home and face the man who had become a stranger, armed with new knowledge and a determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The next few weeks became a delicate balancing act for Elena. By day, she maintained her routine at Morton Financial, analyzing market trends and advising clients. By night, she transformed into an amateur detective, carefully documenting Daniel's movements and scouring his files when he was out. One evening, as Daniel showered after returning late from work, Elena slipped into his home office. Her hands shook slightly as she photographed documents with her phone, heart racing at every creak of the old house. Lang Development Holdings, she muttered, scanning a contract. The language was dense with legal jargon, but certain phrases jumped out. Accelerated foreclosure, non-disclosure agreement, waiver of rights. A sound from the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps approached, then receded. Elena let out a shaky breath, replacing the file exactly as she'd found it. Later that night, she met Marcus at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their booth as they pored over Elena's findings. "This is big," Marcus whispered, eyes wide. "They're not just pressuring people to sell. They're manipulating property values, creating artificial debt." Elena nodded grimly. "And using legal loopholes to speed up the process. Daniel's signature is on most of these." Marcus squeezed her hand briefly. "Remember, he might be a victim too. We need to understand the full picture before we act." As they left the diner, a black sedan drove slowly past. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Elena had called in sick again, waiting in her car near Daniel's office. This time she followed him not to the warehouse district, but to an upscale restaurant downtown. Through the window she watched as Daniel met with Victor Lang himself, a silver-haired man with a shark smile. Their conversation seemed intense, Daniel's posture rigid with stress. Suddenly, Victor looked up and directly at Elena's car. She ducked, but it was too late. Daniel was already heading for the exit. He yanked open her car door, face a mix of anger and fear. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Elena shot back, her prepared speech forgotten in the heat of the moment. "What's going on, Daniel? Who are these people? What have you gotten yourself into?" Daniel's expression crumpled. He slumped into the passenger seat, looking suddenly old and tired. "It's complicated, Elena. I didn't want you involved." "Well, I am involved now," she said, softer. "Talk to me. Please." Over the next hour, in that parked car with rain drumming on the roof, Daniel confessed everything. How he'd been approached by Lang with promises of easy money and career advancement. How those promises had turned to threats when he'd tried to back out. How he'd convinced himself he was protecting Elena by keeping her in the dark. "They know everything about us," Daniel said, voice cracking. "Our finances, our families. I didn't see a way out." Elena took a deep breath. "There's always a way out. But we need to act now." As they drove home, plans forming between them, neither noticed the black sedan following at a discreet distance. The next week was a flurry of clandestine meetings and late-night planning sessions. Elena, Daniel, Marcus, and a trusted detective from the Lakeside PD worked to build an airtight case against Lang and his associates. Daniel, racked with guilt but determined to make amends, agreed to wear a wire to his next meeting with Lang. Elena watched from a surveillance van, heart in her throat, as her husband entered the familiar warehouse. "Remember," Detective Reyes had said, "we need explicit confirmation of illegal activities. Get him talking about the coercion, the property manipulation." For an agonizing hour they listened as Daniel skillfully steered the conversation, drawing out Lang's boasts and threats. Elena gripped Marcus's hand tightly as Lang casually discussed ruining lives, as if he were talking about the weather. Suddenly Lang's tone changed. "You're awfully curious today, Daniel. Is there something I should know?" Elena's blood ran cold. Daniel's response was drowned out by a commotion in the warehouse. Detective Reyes swore, reaching for her radio. "All units, move in now!" The next few minutes were chaos. Elena, ignoring shouts to stay back, ran toward the warehouse. She arrived just in time to see Daniel being led out in handcuffs alongside Lang and several associates. "Wait!" she cried. "He's working with us!" Detective Reyes intercepted her. "It's procedure, Ms. Martinez. We'll sort everything out at the station. Your husband did good work today." As the police cars pulled away, Elena stood in the rain, adrenaline fading to exhaustion. Marcus appeared at her side, umbrella in hand. "It's not over," he reminded her gently. "But this is a huge step. You should be proud." Elena nodded, watching the flashing lights disappear into the distance. The real battle in the courtrooms and the court of public opinion was just beginning. The Lakeside County Courthouse buzzed with activity on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the dramatic warehouse raid. Elena sat in the front row of the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The past half year had been a whirlwind of depositions, evidence reviews, and tense negotiations. As the bailiff called the court to order, Elena caught Daniel's eye at the defense table. He gave her a small, nervous smile. Beside him sat Mrs. Reynolds, looking frail but determined, one of many seniors who had agreed to testify against Lang and his associates. The prosecution's opening statement painted a damning picture of systematic exploitation. "The evidence will show," the district attorney declared, "that Victor Lang and his co-conspirators preyed upon our community's most vulnerable members, using fear, isolation, and deception to steal not just properties, but peace of mind." Over the next 3 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Seniors recounted stories of intimidation and manipulation, their voices growing stronger with each testimony. Financial experts, including some of Elena's colleagues from Morton Financial, broke down the complex web of fraudulent transactions. Daniel's testimony proved crucial. His insider knowledge, combined with the recorded conversations from the sting operation, provided the linchpin in the prosecution's case. Elena watched with a mixture of pride and lingering hurt as her husband detailed his initial complicity and subsequent efforts to make amends. "I made terrible choices," Daniel admitted, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "But I hope that by telling the truth now, I can help prevent others from being victimized." On the final day of the trial, Elena held her breath as the jury filed in. The foreman's voice rang out. "On all counts, we find the defendant, Victor Lang, guilty." A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the courtroom. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she saw the relief on Mrs. Reynolds' face. Lang's associates, including his daughter Sophia, had already pleaded guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. As the judge announced Lang's sentence, 15 years without parole, Elena realized this was more than just the end of a legal battle. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Lakeside. Outside the courthouse, Elena found herself facing a sea of reporters. Taking a deep breath, she stepped up to the microphones. "This victory belongs to the seniors who found the courage to speak up," she stated firmly. "And to everyone who refused to look away from injustice. But our work isn't done. We need to ensure that safeguards are put in place to prevent this from happening again, in Lakeside or anywhere else." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus approached with a wide smile. "Ready for phase 2? He asked. Elena nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice was far from over, but today at least, they had won a significant battle. 1 year later, Elena stood in Mrs. Reynolds' garden, helping her plant tulip bulbs for the coming spring. The neighborhood had changed, not through forced development, but through natural community growth. A newly established neighborhood watch program had seniors and young families working together, creating a support network that would help prevent future exploitation. "Have you heard from Daniel?" Mrs. Reynolds asked gently, pressing a bulb into the rich soil. Elena nodded. After serving 6 months for his role in the scheme, Daniel had moved to another state to start fresh. Their divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, amicable but necessary. Both recognized that their marriage had ended long before the investigation began. "He's doing well," Elena said. "Working with a nonprofit that helps seniors with financial literacy. I think..." I think he's found his way to make amends. Mrs. Reynolds patted Elena's hand. And you, dear? Are you happy? Before Elena could answer, a familiar voice called out. Elena! The senior protection bill passed the city council. She turned to see Marcus walking up the garden path, waving a stack of papers. The legislation, drafted with input from their experiences, would create new safeguards against predatory real estate practices. Elena and Marcus had worked closely with community leaders to make it happen, their professional partnership evolving into something deeper along the way. That evening, they celebrated at the newly renovated senior center. The room was filled with familiar faces, seniors who'd reclaimed their homes, volunteers who'd helped with the investigation, and new friends made along the way. Sometimes, Marcus said, joining Elena by the window, the worst moments in our lives lead us to our true purpose. Elena watched the sunset paint the sky over Lakeside, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. What had started as a suspicious wife following her husband had become a movement that transformed an entire community. We're not done yet, she replied, thinking of other cities, other vulnerable seniors. This is just the beginning. Marcus took her hand, understanding in his eyes. They had already received calls from neighboring communities reporting similar schemes. Their experience could help others, turning a personal tragedy into a force for positive change. As Elena looked around the room at the faces of people whose lives had intersected with hers in such unexpected ways, she felt a deep sense of peace. The pain of betrayal had given way to something more powerful, the knowledge that one person's courage to seek the truth could spark a revolution of compassion. Mrs. Reynolds approached, carrying a tray of her famous lemon bars. You know, Elena, she said with a knowing smile, sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in its biggest challenges. Elena accepted a lemon bar, feeling the warmth of community around her. She had lost a husband, but gained a purpose, lost her illusions, but found her calling. As she watched Marcus chatting animatedly with a group of seniors about their next advocacy project, she knew that some endings were really just beautiful beginnings in disguise. The sun set on Lakeside, casting long shadows across the streets. But unlike the shadows of secrets that had once darkened these neighborhoods, these were the shadows of a day well spent, promising another tomorrow filled with purpose, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of a community united against injustice. What did you think of Elena's story? Please leave a comment with your opinion. 2 buttons will appear next to it, one to subscribe, if you haven't already, and another to watch other exciting stories. Make your choice. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.